Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a truly fascinating intersection of corporate accountability, financial valuation, and local community rights. Specifically, we're looking at Section 2 of the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, or SASB, guidelines for the oil and gas exploration and production sector. Okay, let's jump right in, because we are going to look way past the heavy machinery and the complex geological surveys. Instead, we're focusing entirely on the human element, community relations. So, let's kick things off with a pretty serious question. What is the true cost of a broken relationship? Think about that for a second. And I don't mean that in some philosophical or purely ethical sense either. In the world of oil and gas exploration, community disputes aren't just bad PR or a little headache for the corporate communications team. They directly translate into hard, quantifiable financial losses. When an operator moves into an area, they're setting up shop for years, sometimes decades. They are sinking billions of dollars of upfront capital into one fixed geographic coordinate because, you can't exactly pick up an oil well and move it across town. So, how a company manages its relationship with the locals can literally make or break the profitability of the entire project.
Here is our roadmap for today's explainer. First, we'll map the ground-level community impact. Second, we'll measure the risks of community backlash. Third, we'll look at adopting shared value. And finally, we'll track how non-technical delays are logged directly on the ledger.
All right, let's start with Section 1, the community impact.
Oil and gas exploration is just a highly disruptive business. By its very nature, an active site immediately starts competing for local resources, whether that's water, energy, or just sheer physical space. According to the SASB standards, companies have to navigate 4 really specific flashpoints. Economically, sure, communities want fair wages, but they also want to ensure these massive corporate footprints don't pave over their agricultural land or cause crazy local inflation. Environmentally, they demand clean air, a safe water table, and proper waste disposal. Socially, well, things can get really complicated really fast. A sudden influx of thousands of transient workers can severely strain a small town, totally overwhelming local clinics, the housing market, and schools. And culturally, companies absolutely must protect places of significance, keeping heavy machinery far away from sacred lands or burial sites. Every single one of these is a potential flashpoint between the company's operational goals and the community's everyday survival.
Moving right along to Section 2, risks of community backlash. What actually happens when a company gets it wrong?
When extraction companies enter a new territory, they basically face 2 distinct operational paths. The first is the rent-seeking approach. Now, this is an outdated, highly risky method, essentially exploiting a community's resources without providing any proportional benefits in return. The source material warns that this practically guarantees severe friction. We're talking protests, blocked access roads, and local politicians getting squeezed by angry voters. When that happens, host governments might just step in and slap the company with unpredictable ad hoc taxes or suddenly revoke their export permits. The alternative? The sustainable approach. This is where companies actively conduct social impact assessments, build local consensus, and intentionally address those socioeconomic concerns. The ultimate goal isn't just to be the nice guys, it's to maintain what the industry calls a social license to operate.
And investors don't just view this as some emotional issue. They actually ground it in hard financial reality. The SASB standard explicitly tells companies to quantify their community risks by calculating the value at risk. It's a mathematical formula. Think of it like this. On one hand, you have a fantasy baseline of a perfect, conflict-free project that operates seamlessly. On the other hand, you have the messy, boots-on-the-ground reality of a project that's constantly interrupted by community grievances. That financial gap between the perfect scenario and the messy reality, that is exactly what's at risk.
This actually builds into an incredibly strict valuation model. Step 1, you identify the baseline net present value of a completely risk-free project. Step 2, you pile on all the real-world regional risks, stuff like local corruption, ethnic conflict, or fierce resistance to land resettlement. Step 3 is where the math really hits hard. You apply an additional discount rate premium using a capital asset pricing model, or CAPM. To put it simply, you are basically applying a penalty tax to your valuation because the project is just too volatile to guarantee success. And finally, step 4, you express that value at risk as a permanent reduction in expected cash flows through a discounted cash flow analysis. In plain English, if the locals hate you and your operations are constantly under threat, your future cash is mathematically worth significantly less today.
So, if the math is explicitly telling us that community conflict destroys financial value, how do companies fix the math? Let's shift gears into Section 3, adopting shared value.
The industry's solution to this friction is what SASB calls shared or blended value projects. Crucially, these are not just charity handouts to generate some good PR. These are core, strategic initiatives designed to provide quantifiable socioeconomic benefits to the community, while simultaneously allowing the entity to operate profitably. It's a win-win remedy. For instance, if a company needs to build a massive power grid for its facility, a shared value approach means building it in a way that also electrifies the neighboring village. By tying the community's success directly to the project's success, companies can proactively prevent those incredibly costly operational disruptions.
And companies don't have to guess how to do this either. They look to strict blueprints like the International Finance Corporation's performance standards. They need to meticulously align with Standard 4 to ensure broad community health and safety. They have to follow Standard 5 to handle complex land acquisition highly ethically, avoiding the kind of involuntary resettlement that ruins lives. And they rely on Standard 8 to legally and respectfully protect cultural heritage. By rigidly sticking to these blueprints, companies are systematically dismantling the root causes of a community backlash before it even has a chance to start.
Finally, let's bring it all home with Section 4, tracking non-technical delays. We know the risks, we know the solutions. But how do investors actually measure this on the ledger?
Investors track this using exact SASB accounting codes. The first code, EMEP210B.1, asks for a qualitative discussion and analysis of the processes a company uses to manage community rights. It's a narrative explanation. But the second code, EMEP210B.2, is where it gets highly quantifiable and extremely serious. It demands the raw number and the total duration of what the industry officially calls non-technical delays.
When you look at the official SASB extract, it proves a massive shift in the modern energy industry. Community relations aren't just tucked away in some obscure corporate HR manual anymore. They sit on the exact same investor-grade tier as greenhouse gas emissions and biodiversity impacts. Tracking this is no longer optional, it is absolutely fundamental to auditing the core business model.
So, what exactly constitutes a non-technical delay? Well, the standard is incredibly precise. Think of it this way. If a massive drill stops spinning because a steel gear snapped in half, that is a technical delay. It's an engineering problem. But if that same multi-million-dollar drill stops spinning because of endless political red tape, pending permits, massive community resistance, local protests physically blocking the access roads, or even armed conflict, that is a non-technical delay. It's a complete work stoppage caused entirely by a catastrophic failure in stakeholder relations.
And the ultimate unit of measure required by the standard is so simple but so impactful: days. It strips away all the PR spin and reveals the raw operational downtime. Not vague percentages, not optimistic dollar estimates. Investors demand to know exactly how many days a massive site sat completely idle because the company failed to secure its social license to operate. Every single day a site is shut down by a protest, that CAPM penalty we talked about earlier gets heavier, and the project's net present value just plummets further into the red.
Which brings us to our final provocative thought. We've seen how SASB translates human community relations into hard valuation metrics. We've seen how exploitative rent-seeking leads directly to protests, and how building shared value creates sustainable, profitable operations. So I leave you with this to reconsider. In the modern energy sector, with all of its massive engineering budgets and geological marvels, are non-technical factors actually the most crucial technicalities of all? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll see you next time.